The Rose Beneath the Dust. Chapter 1. The Rose in the Mud. The morning bells of St. Paul's had just finished their chorus when Rose Bennett pushed open the heavy oak door of the Cavendish townhouse and stepped into the autumn chill. Her worn cloak did little against the damp fog rolling in from the Thames, but she pulled it tight and hurried down Grosvenor Street, with her wicker basket swinging at her side. At 19, Rose had known nothing but service. The orphanage had been her first home, the scullery her second, and now after 3 years of proving herself capable, she had risen to the position of parlour-maid in one of London's most distinguished households. Lord Edmund Cavendish was a man whose name appeared regularly in the Times, whose dinners were attended by ministers and merchants alike, whose approval could make or break a parliamentary career. But Rose thought little of such things. As she navigated the crowded streets toward Cheapside Market, her mind was on the shopping list folded in her pocket: 2 pounds of the best tea, ribbon for Lady Cavendish's bonnet, beeswax candles, and whatever fish looked freshest at the stalls. Cheapside was already thick with vendors crying their wares, apple sellers and knife grinders, fishwives and flower girls. Rose wove through the chaos with practiced ease, her eyes scanning the stalls. She had just purchased the tea when she heard a crash and a cry of distress. An elderly woman had stumbled near the poulterer's cart, her basket overturned, apples rolling every direction across the cobblestones. People stepped around her without pause, intent on their own business. The woman struggled to rise, her face twisted in pain. Rose didn't hesitate. She set down her own basket and hurried to the woman's side, kneeling in the muck without thought for her skirts. "Please, ma'am, let me help you." Rose's voice was soft but steady as she took the woman's arm. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle. I'm such a foolish old thing." The woman's eyes were watery with tears of pain and embarrassment. "You're nothing of the sort." Rose helped her to a nearby bench, then darted about collecting the scattered apples, ignoring the mud soaking through her hem. She retrieved the basket, wiped each apple clean on her apron, and placed it gently in the old woman's lap. "Bless you, child. Bless you." The woman gripped Rose's hand. "You've a good heart." "It's nothing anyone wouldn't do," Rose said, though the indifferent crowd around them suggested otherwise. "Remarkable." The word came from somewhere to Rose's left. She turned to see a peculiar figure, a man of perhaps 50, dressed in a threadbare coat that had once been fine. His face was lined and weathered, but his eyes were sharp, almost uncomfortably penetrating. He was staring at Rose with an intensity that made her take a step back. "I beg your pardon?" she said. The man moved closer, studying her face, with the focus of a jeweler examining a diamond. "Your features. Extraordinary. I have studied the human countenance for 30 years. Miss, from Cheapside to Constantinople. I am a student of Lavater, a practitioner of physiognomy." Rose felt her cheeks warm. "I don't know what that means, sir." "The science of reading character in the face." He gestured at her with one gnarled finger. "And yours, my dear, is a face I have seen only in portraits of queens and saints. High, noble brow, intelligence and virtue. Eyes wide-set and clear honesty and courage. The nose straight and refined dignity. The chin neither weak nor harsh strength, tempered with mercy." "Sir, you're embarrassing me." Rose glanced around, worried others were listening, but the physiognomist was not finished. His voice dropped lower, taking on an almost prophetic tone. "You bear the face of one born for greatness, child. Though you kneel in the mud now, you will not remain there. A great soul will see what I see, a soul like a dragon, fierce and powerful, and will lift you up. Mark my words, destiny has plans for you." Rose's laugh was nervous, breathless. "You're very kind, sir, but I'm only a maid. I think you've mistaken me for someone else." The face does not lie. The man pressed a grimy card into her hand. "When the dragon comes, remember old Silas told you true." Before Rose could respond, he melted back into the crowd, leaving her standing with the card in her hand and her heart beating strangely fast. Silas Morehouse, physiognomist and reader of faces. She tucked it into her pocket, helped the old woman arrange for a sedan chair, and hurried back to her marketing. But all through the rest of the morning, as she haggled over fish and tested candles, the strange man's words echoed in her mind. A face of a queen, a dragon-like noble soul. Nonsense, surely. Fortune-tellers' tricks designed to extract coins from the gullible. Yet that night, as she lay in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, Rose found herself touching her own face in the darkness, wondering what it was the strange man had seen there and who, if anyone, might see it too. She could not know that 3 floors above her, Lord Cavendish's eldest son, had just returned from the continent, carrying secrets that would shatter the household's peace. Nor could she guess that within a fortnight, her life would change in ways the physiognomist himself could never have predicted. The dragon was coming, and Rose Bennet, orphan and maid, would never kneel in the mud again. Chapter 2: When the Dragon Met the Dove. The household had been in controlled chaos for 3 days, preparing for the arrival of Mr. Arthur Lee. "Mind you don't chip the Wedgwood, Mrs. Hartley," the housekeeper warned as Rose carefully arranged the tea service in the drawing room. "Lord Cavendish says this Mr. Lee is the finest legal mind of his generation. Topped the King's Bench examination with answers so brilliant the examiners published them in the law journals." Rose had heard the name whispered with reverence throughout the house. Arthur Lee, the barrister who had defended 3 innocent men from the gallows in a single term. The advocate whose arguments before Parliament had helped reform the debtors' prisons. The man whom Lord Cavendish hoped to mentor, mold, and eventually attach to his own political fortunes. "He's only 8 and 20, Molly, the scullery maid, had sighed dreamily. "And they say he's terribly handsome, dark hair and fierce eyes, like Lord Byron. They say he works through the night by candlelight," added Thomas the footman with more practical admiration. "Never loses a case. They call him the Dragon of the Old Bailey because once he sinks his teeth into an argument, he never lets go." Dragon! The word made Rose's hand pause over the teacup she was polishing. She thought of the strange physiognomist in Cheapside, his weathered face so earnest as he'd pressed that card into her palm. She still had it, tucked in her pocket like a talisman she was too sensible to believe in but too superstitious to discard. Foolishness, she told herself firmly and returned to her work. Arthur Lee arrived at 3:30, his carriage pulling up to the Cavendish townhouse just as autumn rain began to spatter the windows. Rose watched from the upstairs landing as Lord Cavendish himself descended to greet his guest, a mark of unusual respect. From her vantage point, she could see only the top of Mr. Lee's dark head as he stepped into the entrance hall, hear the low rumble of his voice as he exchanged pleasantries with their host. Then they were climbing the stairs, and Rose quickly retreated to the servants' passage. She had no business lingering. She was expected in the drawing room to serve tea, nothing more. Yet her heart was beating faster than it should. When she entered the drawing room 10 minutes later with the tea service, she kept her eyes properly lowered. Lord Cavendish was holding forth about some matter of parliamentary procedure, gesturing expansively with his pipe. Rose moved quietly to the table by the fire, setting down the heavy silver tray with practiced ease. "Ah, Rose," Lord Cavendish said, pausing in his monologue. "Fresh tea, excellent." She curtsied and began to pour, focusing on the familiar ritual, the angle of the pot, the steam rising from the cups. the precise measure of milk and sugar. It was only when she moved to serve the guest that she finally looked up and found herself unable to look away. Arthur Lee was younger than she had imagined, perhaps not yet 30, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and needed a barber's attention. His face was all sharp angles, strong jaw, high cheekbones, a nose that might have been broken once and healed slightly crooked. Not handsome in the classical sense, but arresting, compelling. It was his eyes that held her, though. Dark as coal and just as intense. They fixed on her with a focus that made her feel as though everything else in the room had vanished. Not the look of a gentleman noticing a servant, but something else entirely. Something that saw her. The teacup trembled slightly in her hand. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was quieter than she had expected. Gentle almost. Rose managed a small curtsy, not trusting herself to speak, and carefully offered him the cup. Their fingers brushed as he took it just for an instant. Barely a touch at all, but she felt it like a spark of static electricity on a winter day. His eyes widened slightly as if he had felt it too. "Rose is one of our finest maids," Lord Cavendish was saying, oblivious. "Been with us 3 years now. Orphaned young, poor thing, but she's made something of herself. Excellent character, excellent work." "I can see that, Mr. Lee said softly, still looking at Rose. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly stepped back from the table. Her training warring with the strange pull she felt toward this man she had known for less than a minute. "Will there be anything else, my lord?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. No, that will be all." "Oh, but do make sure Mr. Lee's rooms are properly aired. He'll be staying with us for the next fortnight." "Yes, my lord." Rose curtsied again and turned toward the door, acutely aware of Mr. Lee's gaze following her across the room. She had almost reached the safety of the corridor when his voice stopped her. "Forgive me." Rose turned back, her hand on the doorframe. Lord Cavendish looked mildly puzzled. Mr. Lee had half risen from his chair, an oddly vulnerable expression on his sharp features. "Might I know your full name?" he asked. "It seems only courteous, as I'll be staying in the household." Lord Cavendish's eyebrows rose. It was an unusual request, almost improper, but Rose found herself answering before her host could speak. "Rose Bennet, sir." "Rose Bennet?" He repeated it slowly, as if committing it to memory. Then, to her astonishment, he added, "Thank you, Miss Bennet." "Miss." Not girl or simply Rose, but Miss Bennet, as if she were a lady receiving a caller in her own drawing room. The courtesy was so unexpected, so at odds with the usual distance between master and servant, that Rose felt something shift in her chest. She managed to smile, brief, unguarded, and saw answering warmth flicker in his dark eyes. "You're welcome, Mr. Lee." Then she fled before she could do something foolish like linger in the doorway staring at him. The servants' corridor was blessedly cool and dim after the warmth of the drawing room. Rose pressed her back against the wall, willing her racing heart to slow. This was absurd. She was behaving like Molly, mooning over a gentleman she had barely met. Mr. Arthur Lee was a brilliant barrister, a rising star in legal circles, a man destined for great things. She was a housemaid, an orphan. The distance between them was as vast as the distance between Earth and stars, yet she could still feel the ghost of his touch on her fingertips. "Rose, there you are." Mrs. Hartley appeared at the end of the corridor, her face flushed. "Lady Cavendish wants her shawl, the Norwich silk. Not the cashmere, and the fire in the library needs tending. Don't stand about daydreaming, girl." "Yes, Mrs. Hartley." "Sorry, Mrs. Hartley." Rose hurried toward the back stairs, grateful for the distraction of work. She had hours of tasks ahead of her before the household retired for the night. No time to dwell on dark eyes and gentle voices in the way a simple thank you could sound like a promise. But that evening, as she turned down the bed in the guest room that would be Mr. Lee's, she found herself moving more slowly than usual. She smoothed the counterpane with extra care, made sure fresh water stood in. The ewer placed a candle on the writing desk in case he worked late, as Thomas said he did. The room smelled of beeswax and lavender. Respectable. Proper. Yet Rose felt like an intruder in some sacred space, preparing a sanctuary for a man she had no right to think about. She was turning to leave when she noticed a book on the nightstand, something Lord Cavendish must have left for his guest. She tilted her head to read the spine commentaries on the laws of England. Blackstone. She had heard the title before when Lord Cavendish entertained other legal men. On impulse, she opened it to the frontispiece. Someone had written in a strong, slanting hand, "The law is reason free from passion." But what of justice? Must that not have passion if it is to have purpose? L. Rose traced the initials with one finger. Arthur Lee. Even his handwriting seemed to carry that same intensity, that fierce focus she had seen in his eyes. A dragon-like noble soul will lift you from the mud. She closed the book quickly and left the room, but the prophecy followed her down the stairs and into her narrow bed in the servants' quarters. As she lay in the darkness, listening to Molly's gentle snoring from the next cot, Rose pulled out the crumpled card. Silas Morehouse, physiognomist and reader of faces. Dragon of the Old Bailey. Could it be? Could a chance meeting with a street fortune-teller actually have predicted this moment? No, it was coincidence. It had to be. Yet sleep was long in coming that night, and when it did, Rose dreamed of dark eyes and gentle voices, of teacups and trembling hands, of a world where the distance between Earth and stars was not so insurmountable after all. In the room 2 floors above, Arthur Lee sat at the writing desk, a brief for tomorrow's consultation forgotten before him. He was thinking about gray eyes and quiet dignity, about a face that seemed to carry its own light, about a dove who had somehow walked into the dragon's lair and changed everything. Chapter 3. The first test. Filling the room with 3 pence. Arthur had been a guest in the Cavendish household for 3 days when Lord Edmund decided to test him. It happened after dinner on a drizzly Thursday evening. The men had retired to the library, that masculine sanctuary of leather and tobacco smoke, while Lady Cavendish and her daughters withdrew to the music room. Arthur had been expecting conversation about legal reform or perhaps parliamentary strategy. Instead, Lord Cavendish settled into his chair with a peculiar gleam in his eye. "Tell me, Mr. Lee," the older man said, swirling brandy in his glass. "You've a reputation for solving impossible problems, finding legal precedents where none seem to exist, discovering loopholes in centuries-old statutes. They say your mind works in ways other men's do not." Arthur shifted uncomfortably. He had never been at ease with praise. "I simply work harder than most, my lord. There is no mystery to it." "Harder." "Yes," Lord Cavendish smiled. "But is that all? Or is there something more, a particular quality of thought that separates the brilliant from the merely diligent?" "I couldn't say, my lord." "Well then, let us find out." Lord Cavendish stood and gestured toward the center of the library, where a large oriental carpet stretched between towering bookshelves. "I have a challenge for you, Mr. Lee, a test, if you will." Arthur rose, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "What manner of test?" "A simple one." The Lord's eyes twinkled with something like mischief. "You see this room 20 feet by 30, I should estimate. High ceilings, as you can observe. I want you to fill it. Completely. Every inch of space from floor to ceiling. Fill it, my lord. Entirely. Leave no emptiness. Lord Cavendish reached into his waistcoat and produced 3 copper coins, which he placed on the desk with deliberate ceremony. And you must accomplish this feat with only these 3 pence. No more. No borrowing, no begging, no calling in favors. 3 pence and the entirety of this room must be filled. Arthur stared at the coins. 3 pence. Enough to buy a loaf of bread or a pint of ale. Certainly not enough to purchase sufficient material to fill a space of this size. Even straw or sawdust would cost far more. When must I accomplish this, my lord? You have until tomorrow evening. 24 hours. Lord Cavendish resumed his seat, clearly pleased with himself. I've posed this riddle to 3 other young men I considered mentoring. None solved it. Let us see if the dragon of the Old Bailey has teeth sharp enough for this particular challenge. Arthur picked up the 3 coins, feeling their weight in his palm. His mind was already racing through possibilities and discarding them just as quickly. Water? No, one couldn't fill air with water. Smoke? It would dissipate. Paper? Too expensive. I accept your challenge, my lord. Excellent. I shall look forward to tomorrow evening's revelation. Lord Cavendish raised his glass. Or perhaps I should say tomorrow evening's admission of defeat. No shame in it, my boy. As I said, 3 others have failed before you. Arthur pocketed the coins and excused himself, claiming fatigue. But sleep was the furthest thing from his mind as he climbed the stairs to his room. For hours, Arthur paced his chamber, the 3 coins clinking in his pocket like a mocking refrain. He tried to approach the problem as he would a legal puzzle, examining it from every angle, looking for the hidden solution that must surely exist. Lord Cavendish was not a cruel man. He would not pose an impossible challenge. Therefore, a solution existed. Arthur simply had to find it. But what? What could 3 pence buy that would fill such a vast space? He thought of gases, of smells, of sounds. Could one fill a room with music? But how would one purchase music for 3 pence? And how would one prove the room was truly filled? By midnight, his head was pounding. By 2 in the morning, he had convinced himself the challenge was indeed impossible, designed merely to humble him. By 3, he was staring at the ceiling, exhausted but too frustrated to sleep. At 4, he gave up entirely and went downstairs, hoping a glass of water might clear his head. The house was silent, wrapped in that particular stillness that comes in the hours before dawn. Arthur made his way through the darkened corridors by memory, not wanting to wake the household by calling for a lamp. He was passing the servants' staircase when he heard a soft sound, barely audible. Someone crying. Arthur paused, his hand on the banister. It was none of his business. Servants had their own troubles, their own private griefs. He should continue to the kitchen and leave whoever it was to their sorrow. Yet something made him climb the narrow stairs instead. At the top, a single candle burned in a wall sconce, and by its light he saw Rose Bennet sitting on the top step, her face in her hands. She wore a simple nightdress with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and her dark hair fell loose about her face. She looked up at his footstep and her eyes widened. "Mr. Lee, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disturb." "You haven't disturbed anyone," Arthur said quietly. "Are you all right, Miss Bennet?" She wiped her eyes quickly, clearly embarrassed to be seen in such a state. "Yes, sir. I'm fine. It's foolish, really." Arthur found himself sitting on the step beside her, propriety be damned. At 4 in the morning in the silent house, the usual rules seemed to matter less. "Grief is never foolish," he said gently. Rose was quiet for a moment, her hands twisting in her lap. Then, perhaps because the darkness made confession easier, she spoke. It's 7 years today since I lost my mother. She was a seamstress, worked herself to exhaustion trying to keep us fed after my father died. I was 12 when the fever took her. Her voice was steady, but Arthur could hear the old pain beneath it. The parish sent me to the orphanage. I've been in service ever since. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Rose managed a small smile. I don't usually weep about it. But sometimes in the quiet hours, I think about what she used to say, her little bits of wisdom. She couldn't read or write, my mother, but she was clever in her way. She'd say things like, "The smallest key can open the largest door," or, "A kind word costs nothing but buys everything." Arthur felt something stir in his memory. What else did she say? Rose looked at him, perhaps surprised by his interest. Oh, all sorts of things. Sometimes the smallest light drives away the greatest darkness. That was one of her favorites. She'd say it when she was lighting the candle at night, after we'd been sitting in the dark to save oil. Sometimes the smallest light drives away the greatest darkness. The words seemed to echo in Arthur's mind, repeating, expanding, shifting into something else entirely. Light. Darkness. Filling space. "Miss Bennet," he said slowly, his heart beginning to race. "Would you say that a room filled with light is filled?" She blinked at him. "I suppose so, sir. Light fills every corner, doesn't it? Drives out the shadows. And could one purchase light for 3 pence? Well, yes. A candle costs a penny if it's a good one. Or a halfpenny for rushlight, though those don't burn as long." Arthur stood abruptly, a grin spreading across his face. "Miss Bennet, you are absolutely brilliant." "Sir?" She looked utterly confused. "Your mother's wisdom has just solved an impossible puzzle." Arthur pulled the 3 coins from his pocket. "Tell me, if I wanted to buy the best candle available, where would I go?" "There's a chandler on Milk Street who makes excellent tallow candles, pure and clean burning, a penny each or 3 for 2 halfpenny. And the shop opens at 6 o'clock, sir." Arthur checked his pocket watch. 2 hours. He could wait 2 hours. He sat back down on the step, suddenly exhausted but exhilarated. "Thank you, Miss Bennet. You've saved me from admitting defeat." Rose smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "I don't understand what I've done, sir, but I'm glad if I've helped." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the house creak and settle around them. Then Rose asked, "What puzzle were you trying to solve, if I may ask?" Arthur explained Lord Cavendish's challenge. As he spoke, he watched Rose's expression shift from confusion to understanding to delight. "A candle," she said softly. "Oh, that's very clever, Mr. Lee. It's your mother's wisdom, not my cleverness. But you saw how to apply it. That's the clever part." She stood, drawing her shawl tighter. "I should go back to bed." "And you should too, sir. You'll need your rest for tomorrow evening." "Yes. Thank you again, Miss Bennet." She started down the stairs, then paused and looked back. "Mr. Lee, when you present your solution to Lord Cavendish, will you tell him it was a servant's idea?" The question caught Arthur off guard. He saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear that he might claim her wisdom as his own. "Of course I will," he said firmly. "I would never take credit for another's insight, especially not yours." Her smile could have lit the dark stairwell without any candle at all. The next evening, Lord Cavendish's library was crowded with observers. Word had spread through the household that Arthur would attempt the 3 pence challenge, and the Lord had invited several friends to witness either triumph or humiliation. Lady Cavendish was there, along with 2 neighboring gentlemen and Lord Edmund's eldest son, William. Arthur stood in the center of the carpet, very aware of all eyes upon him. In his hand, he held a single tallow candle, the finest the chandler on Milk Street could provide, purchased that morning for exactly 3 pence. "Well, Mr. Lee," Lord Cavendish leaned back in. Chapter 4. The Second Test. A room of laughter and tears. The trouble began, as such things often do, with Lady Cavendish's morning tea. Rose had just finished arranging the breakfast service in the morning room when Lady Cavendish swept in, followed by her daughter, Miss Henrietta. At 23, Henrietta possessed her father's sharp mind, but her mother's sharper tongue, and she wielded both with the casual cruelty of someone who had never known hardship. "Mama, did you hear?" Henrietta was saying as Rose quietly poured the tea. "Father has increased that girl's wages. 2 whole shillings a week. For what? Reciting some peasant proverb?" Lady Cavendish's lips thinned. "Your father can be remarkably sentimental about the lower orders. It comes from reading too much philosophy." Rose kept her eyes down, her hand steady on the teapot despite the heat creeping up her neck. She had learned long ago that servants who reacted to such comments found themselves seeking new positions. "And did you see how Mr. Lee looked at her?" Henrietta continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "One would think she was a lady, the way he addresses her. Miss Bennet, if you please, it's absurd." "Mr. Lee is young," Lady Cavendish said dismissively. "He'll learn the proper order of things soon enough. Men always do." Rose finished pouring and curtsied, preparing to withdraw, but Henrietta's next words stopped her cold. "I think she's trying to catch him, setting her cap at a gentleman far above her station. Father should dismiss her before she causes real trouble." "That will be all, Rose," Lady Cavendish said coldly. Rose fled to the safety of the servants' hall, her cheeks burning. She wasn't trying to catch anyone. She had barely spoken to Mr. Lee beyond their encounter on the stairs and brief exchanges during meals. If he treated her with unusual courtesy, that was his choice, not her machination. But the accusation stung precisely because there was a grain of truth in it. She did think about Arthur Lee far more than was proper. Did wonder what it would be like if the world were different, if the distance between maid and barrister were not an unbridgeable chasm. "Don't mind them," Mrs. Hartley said, looking up from her accounts. "Lady Cavendish has been out of sorts ever since her sister married that merchant's son. She's terrified of anything that threatens the social order." "I'm not threatening anything," Rose said quietly. "Of course you're not, dear. But you made her daughter look foolish solving a puzzle none of her fancy suitors could manage. That's unforgivable to women like Henrietta." Rose nodded and threw herself into her work, trying to forget the whole unpleasant incident. But Lady Cavendish, it seemed, was not finished with her. That evening, Lord Cavendish summoned Arthur to the library once more. This time, his wife and daughter were present, along with William and 2 visiting cousins. Rose was called in to serve port, and her stomach dropped when she saw the assembled company. "Mr. Lee," Lord Cavendish began, "my wife has suggested that perhaps my previous challenge was too simple, that the solution was obvious to anyone with basic wit." Arthur's expression remained neutral, but Rose saw his jaw tighten slightly. "I found it quite challenging, my lord." Nonetheless, Lady Cavendish believes a second test is warranted, one that cannot be solved by mere trickery. The lord's eyes flickered to his wife, and Rose sensed tension between them. "So I propose another challenge, with the same constraints. 3 pence and this room, but this time, Mr. Lee, you must fill it with something far more complex than light." "And what would that be, my lord?" Lady Cavendish spoke, her voice sharp as cut glass. "Laughter and tears. Both, mind you. Not one or the other. The room must be filled with genuine laughter and genuine tears. And you must accomplish this with only 3 pence. Henrietta smirked. I should think that quite impossible. Nothing is impossible, Arthur said quietly, but Rose could see uncertainty in his eyes. You have until tomorrow evening, Lord Cavendish said. The same audience will reconvene to judge your success or failure. Arthur bowed. I accept the challenge, my lord. As the gathering dispersed, Rose saw Lady Cavendish whisper something to Henrietta, and both women glanced in her direction with cold satisfaction. This wasn't really about testing Arthur at all, Rose realized. It was about humiliating her, proving that the previous success had been mere luck, that a maid had no business contributing to gentlemen's games. She was surprised, therefore, when Arthur caught her arm gently as she carried the empty port tray toward the servants' passage. Miss Bennet, might I speak with you? Lady Cavendish and Henrietta had already left, but William Cavendish remained by the fire, and he watched with interest as Rose set down her tray. Of course, Mr. Lee. Arthur glanced at William, then back to Rose. I find myself in need of that particular wisdom you possess. The challenge is complex. You want her help? William said, not unkindly. Surely you can solve this yourself, Lee. You're the brilliant barrister, after all. Brilliance knows no station, Arthur replied firmly. And Miss Bennet has already proved herself cleverer than most men I know. Rose felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. I'll help however I can, sir. Though I confess, laughter and tears with 3 pence. It's a puzzle. Perhaps we might discuss it somewhere more private. Arthur looked uncomfortable, clearly aware that it was highly improper to suggest a private meeting with a maid. William stood, draining his glass. Use the morning room. I'll make sure you're not disturbed. He smiled at Rose. My sister can be poisonous when she feels threatened. Don't let her drive you away. Father values you even if Mother doesn't. After he left, Arthur and Rose stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Arthur gestured toward the morning room and Rose followed, her heart beating faster than it should. In the morning room, with the door properly ajar for propriety's sake, Arthur paced while Rose sat on the edge of a chair. Laughter and tears, he muttered. How does one purchase emotion? It's absurd. Not purchase, Rose said slowly. Create, or rather, inspire. Arthur stopped pacing. What do you mean? Well, we can't buy laughter or tears themselves, but we could buy something that causes them, something that moves people to those emotions. A play? Arthur's eyes lit up. But 3 pence would never buy admission to a theater, even for one person, let alone enough for a performance here. Not a theater play, Rose said. But there are street performers, storytellers, ballad singers, comedians. Covent Garden is full of them in the evenings. Arthur sat down across from her, leaning forward intently. Could one hire such a performer for 3 pence? I don't know, sir. But we could ask. We. Rose met his eyes. Lady Cavendish designed this challenge to humiliate me through you. If it fails, I'm the one who'll suffer. So yes, we. If you'll have my company. A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. Miss Bennet, I would be honored by your company. Shall we venture to Covent Garden tomorrow morning? I'll need permission to leave the house. Leave that to me. The next morning, Rose found herself walking through the streets of London beside Arthur Lee, chaperoned at a discreet distance by Thomas the footman. It was a gray, drizzling day, but Rose barely noticed the weather. She was too aware of Arthur's presence beside her, the way he occasionally touched her elbow to guide her around a puddle, the animated way he discussed various legal cases as they walked. You should have been a barrister yourself, he said at one point. Your mind works in exactly the right way, seeing connections others miss, finding novel solutions. Women can't be barristers, Mr. Lee. No, but they should be. He said it with such conviction that Rose felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness, but of something else entirely, of being seen, truly seen, by someone who mattered. Covent Garden was bustling despite the weather. Street vendors hawked everything from flowers to fried fish, while performers competed for attention and coins. They passed a juggler, a man with a trained monkey, a woman singing bawdy ballads that made Rose blush. Then they heard a voice rising above the chaos, rich and compelling. "Gather round, good people. Hear the tale of the clever cobbler and the foolish king." A crowd had formed around a small raised platform where a man of perhaps 50 years held court. He was dressed in motley, a patchwork coat that had seen better days, but he commanded attention like a king himself. His face was mobile, expressive, shifting from character to character as he acted out multiple roles. "That's Tom Wickham," Thomas whispered, coming up beside them. "Famous storyteller he is. Performs for the quality sometimes, but mostly works the streets." They watched as Tom finished his tale, a hilarious story of a cobbler who outwitted a pompous monarch, and the crowd erupted in laughter. Then as coins clattered into his hat, Tom's expression shifted. "But stay, friends, for laughter is only half of life. Let me tell you now of the loyal daughter, a tale to break your hearts." His voice dropped, becoming soft and aching, and he began a story of a girl who sacrificed everything to save her dying father. Rose found herself transfixed as Tom portrayed the daughter's desperation, her father's gratitude, and finally the tragic moment when she sold herself into servitude to pay for his medicine, only to have him die the night before she was to leave. By the time Tom finished, several women in the crowd were openly weeping, and even the men looked Chapter 5. The Lady of Light. The summons came on a frost-bright morning in December, 3 weeks after the second challenge. Rose was polishing silver in the butler's pantry when Thomas appeared, slightly breathless. "Lord Cavendish wants you in the library. Immediately." And he hesitated. "You're to bring your contract of service." Rose's hand stilled on the candlestick she'd been buffing. Her contract was kept in Mrs. Hartley's desk, a simple document binding her to 3 years of service in exchange for wages, room, and board. She had another 18 months remaining. Did he say why? Thomas shook his head, but his expression was worried. Lady Cavendish was in there earlier. She looked angry. Rose's stomach dropped. Ever since the storytelling evening, Lady Cavendish had regarded her with barely concealed hostility. Henrietta had been even worse, making pointed comments about servants who forget their place whenever Rose was within earshot. Perhaps this was it, the dismissal she'd been half expecting. Lady Cavendish had finally convinced her husband to remove the troublesome maid who had dared to shine too brightly. With trembling hands, Rose retrieved her contract from Mrs. Hartley and made her way to the library. She paused outside the door, smoothing her apron, steadying her breath. Whatever came, she would face it with dignity. She knocked softly. Enter. The library was full of people. Lord Cavendish stood by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. Beside him sat Lady Cavendish, her face tight with displeasure. William lounged near the window, and Henrietta perched on a settee, looking simultaneously curious and vindictive. And there, standing slightly apart from the family, was Arthur Lee. His dark eyes found Rose's immediately, and something in his gaze, concern, reassurance, something deeper, steadied her racing heart. "Miss Bennet," Lord Cavendish said gravely, "you brought your contract?" "Yes, my lord." Rose held out the folded document with a steady hand, though her knees felt weak. Lord Cavendish took it, unfolded it, and read it through slowly. The silence stretched unbearably. Then, to Rose's utter shock, he walked to the fireplace and dropped the contract directly into the flames. "My lord," Rose gasped, "what are you—" "That contract," Lord Cavendish said, watching the paper curl and blacken, "bound you to a position you have far outgrown. It is no longer applicable." Lady Cavendish made a small, angry sound. "Edmund, this is madness." "Silence, Margaret." The steel in his voice made even his wife recoil. "I have made my decision, and I will not be swayed." He turned to face Rose fully, and his expression softened. "Miss Bennet Rose, these past weeks have opened my eyes to something I should have seen long ago. This household, this society, judges people by their birth rather than their character. We elevate the mediocre because they have the right parents, and we dismiss the brilliant because they were born in the wrong circumstances. My lord, I don't understand. You have demonstrated wisdom that exceeds most educated gentlemen I know. You have shown intelligence, grace, and a quality of mind that would be remarkable in any station. Yet you are forced to scrub floors and carry tea trays because of an accident of birth." Lord Cavendish moved closer to her. "That ends today." Rose felt the room spinning. "Sir, I have no daughters who share my values," he continued, ignoring Henrietta's sharp intake of breath. "Henrietta has her mother's prejudices, and my younger girls are too young to have formed their characters. But you, Rose, you embody everything I believe a child of mine should be." He took her hands in his, and Rose saw that his eyes were damp. "I am a man of considerable influence. With the king's permission, which I have already secured, I wish to make you my ward, to adopt you legally as my daughter with all the rights and privileges that entails. You will be Miss Rose Cavendish, a gentleman's daughter, with a dowry and a future befitting your true worth." The room exploded. "Father, you cannot be serious." Henrietta shot to her feet. "She's a maid. What will people say?" "They will say I have excellent judgment." Lord Cavendish replied calmly. "This is an outrage." Lady Cavendish's voice was shrill. "Edmund, I forbid it. Think of our reputation. Our reputation will survive. And I did not ask your permission, Margaret. I informed you of my decision." Rose could barely process what she was hearing. Adopted, a gentleman's daughter. It was impossible. It was the stuff of fairy stories, not real life. "My lord," she whispered, "I cannot accept this. It's too much. I don't deserve. You deserve far more than I can give you," Lord Cavendish said gently. "But this is a start. Will you accept, Rose? Will you become my daughter?" She looked around the room at Lady Cavendish's fury, at Henrietta's disbelief, at William's slowly growing smile, and finally at Arthur, who was watching her with an expression of such hope and tenderness that it made her breath catch. "Ah, yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, my lord. I accept." Lord Cavendish embraced her, and Rose felt tears streaming down her face. Over his shoulder, she saw Lady Cavendish storm from the room, Henrietta following with one last venomous glare. But William came forward and took her hand. "Welcome to the family, sister. You'll be better company than Henrietta ever was." When Lord Cavendish finally released her, he turned to Arthur. "Mr. Lee, a word." Arthur stepped forward, and Rose noticed his hands were clenched at his sides, as if he were bracing for something difficult. "You have been observing all of this with great interest," Lord Cavendish said. "I wonder why." Arthur met the older man's gaze steadily. "Because I care deeply about Miss Bennet's welfare, my lord." "Care deeply. An interesting phrase." Lord Cavendish studied him. "Would you say you love her?" Rose's heart stopped. Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Then he said simply and clearly, "Yes, my lord. I love her. I have loved her almost from the moment I met her. I know it's mad we've known each other mere weeks, but I cannot imagine my future without her in it. Arthur, Rose breathed, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. Please. He turned to her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her want to weep. Rose, you are the most remarkable person I have ever met. Your wisdom, your kindness, your brilliant mind, they have captivated me entirely. I know I have no right to speak this way. I know I should have courted you properly, should have waited, should have... Do you wish to marry her? Lord Cavendish interrupted. Arthur turned back to him. More than anything in the world. But I am a barrister of modest means. I can offer her my love and my devotion, but little else. She deserves to choose her own fate, Lord Cavendish said firmly. I have just gained a daughter of rare wisdom and even rarer character. If she wishes to marry you, Mr. Lee, you have my blessing and a dowry of £10,000. Henrietta, who had returned to hover in the doorway, made a sound like a wounded animal. Arthur looked stunned. My lord, that's extraordinarily generous, but nothing. You are the finest young man I know, Arthur. You fight for justice. You see worth where others see only station. And you love my newly adopted daughter with a devotion that does you credit. Lord Cavendish smiled. So I ask you formally, will you make Rose your wife? Arthur turned to Rose, and she saw everything in his eyes: love, hope, fear, wonder. Rose, could you possibly? She crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps and took his hands. Yes, Arthur, yes. I will marry you. He pulled her into his arms, and she heard him whisper against her hair. I will spend every day of my life proving myself worthy of you. You already have, she whispered back. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in January, in the small chapel at St. George's, Hanover Square. Despite Lady Cavendish's attempts to keep the ceremony quiet, she was still mortified by her husband's adoption of a former servant word had spread through London society. The church was packed with barristers, politicians, and curious members of the ton who wanted to see the Cinderella marriage for themselves. Rose wore a gown of ivory silk, a gift from Lord Cavendish, and carried white roses. As she walked down the aisle on her adoptive father's arm, she saw Arthur waiting at the altar, his eyes fixed on her with such love that she felt she might float away. Who gives this woman to be married? The vicar asked. I do, Lord Cavendish said, his voice ringing clear, and I do so with great pride. The ceremony was brief but beautiful. When Arthur slipped the ring on her finger and said, With this ring I thee wed, Rose felt the last vestiges of her old life fall away. She was no longer Rose Bennet, orphan and maid. She was Rose Lee, beloved wife of a brilliant barrister, adopted daughter of a lord. She was free. The years that followed were beyond anything Rose could have imagined. Arthur's career flourished. With Lord Cavendish's patronage and Rose's counsel, for he consulted her on every major case. Valuing her insight as much as any law book, he became the most sought-after barrister in England. He took on cases others deemed hopeless, defending the poor, challenging unjust laws, speaking truth to power with the fierce conviction that had earned him his nickname. Rose was at his side through it all. As Lady Rose Lee, she could move in the highest circles of society, but she never forgot where she had come from. She founded schools for orphaned girls, established a charity to help servants escape abusive households, and spoke publicly about reform scandalizing the conservative elements of society, but